The Maniac of Goiânia case, serial killer who attacked several victims, especially women. Chapter 1. Terror in the heart of Brazil. In the sprawling urban landscape of Goiânia, the capital city of Goiás state in central Brazil, a shadow of terror began to fall across the community in the late 1990s. What started as isolated incidents of violence against women would evolve into one of Brazil's most chilling serial killer cases, forever changing how the city's residents viewed their safety and security in their own neighborhoods. Goiânia, a planned city built in the 1930s to serve as the state capital, had grown into a modern metropolis of over 1 million inhabitants by the time the killings began. Known for its wide avenues, green spaces, and relatively peaceful atmosphere compared to other major Brazilian cities, Goiânia represented the promise of progress and prosperity in Brazil's interior. However, this sense of security would be shattered by a predator who stalked the streets with methodical precision. The man who would become known as the Maniaco de Goiânia, Maniac of Goiânia, was Tiago Henrique Gomes de Rocha, a seemingly ordinary young man whose outward appearance masked the mind of a calculating killer. Born in 1978, Tiago grew up in Goiânia's middle-class neighborhoods, attending local schools and appearing to live a normal life that gave no obvious indication of the monster he would become. By day, Tiago worked as a security guard, a profession that provided him with knowledge of surveillance systems, patrol routes, and the vulnerabilities of the properties he was supposed to protect. This insider knowledge would prove crucial to his ability to evade capture for years, while terrorizing the city with a series of brutal attacks that seemed to follow no predictable pattern. The first confirmed attack attributed to Tiago occurred in 1998, when he was just 20 years old. A young woman was brutally assaulted in her home, surviving the attack but bearing physical and psychological scars that would last a lifetime. At the time, police treated it as an isolated incident, unaware that they were witnessing the beginning of a killing spree that would claim dozens of lives over the next several years. What made Tiago particularly dangerous was his ability to blend into society while harboring violent fantasies that he methodically planned to fulfill. Unlike many serial killers who show obvious signs of mental illness or antisocial behavior, Tiago maintained relationships, held steady employment, and presented himself as a reliable and trustworthy member of his community. The attacks that followed would reveal a pattern of escalating violence directed primarily against women, though Tiago would also target men, children, and elderly victims when the opportunity presented itself. His crimes were characterized by extreme brutality, sexual violence, and a level of planning that demonstrated both intelligence and complete lack of empathy for his victims. As the body count began to rise and the attacks became more frequent, the people of Goiânia found themselves living in fear, unsure when or where the killer would strike next. The randomness of his target selection made everyone feel vulnerable, creating an atmosphere of terror that would grip the city for years. Chapter 2. The Making of a Monster. Understanding how Tiago Henrique Gomes de Rocha transformed from an apparently normal child into one of Brazil's most prolific serial killers requires examining the complex interplay of psychological, social, and environmental factors that shaped his development. Born into a working-class family in Goiânia, Tiago's early life appeared unremarkable to outside observers. But beneath the surface, disturbing patterns were already beginning to emerge. Tiago's childhood was marked by emotional neglect and exposure to violence that would prove formative in his psychological development. His father was largely absent from his life, leaving his mother to raise him and his siblings with limited resources and support. The lack of a stable father figure and the stress of poverty created an environment where normal emotional development was compromised. From an early age, Tiago displayed signs of the antisocial behavior that would later characterize his criminal activities. He was cruel to animals, showed little empathy for others, and seemed to derive pleasure from causing pain and fear. These early warning signs, which are now recognized as potential indicators of future violent behavior, were either ignored or dismissed as normal childhood misbehavior. His academic performance was mediocre, and he struggled to form meaningful relationships with peers and teachers. Tiago was often described as a loner who preferred to observe others rather than participate in group activities. This social isolation allowed his violent fantasies to develop unchecked, as he had few positive influences or outlets for his emotions. During his teenage years, Tiago's behavior became increasingly problematic, though he learned to hide his true nature behind a facade of normalcy. He began experimenting with voyeurism and petty crimes, testing the boundaries of what he could get away with while developing the skills that would later make him such an effective predator. The transition to adulthood brought new opportunities for Tiago to act on his violent impulses. His job as a security guard provided him with access to properties, knowledge of security systems, and an understanding of police procedures that would prove invaluable in his criminal career. The irony of a serial killer working in security was not lost on investigators who would later piece together his crimes. Tiago's psychological profile revealed a complex individual who combined high intelligence with complete lack of empathy. He was capable of planning elaborate crimes while maintaining relationships and employment, demonstrating the sophisticated manipulation skills that allowed him to evade suspicion for so long. The development of his violent fantasies was gradual, but persistent, evolving from thoughts of control and domination to elaborate scenarios involving sexual violence and murder. These fantasies became increasingly detailed and specific, eventually driving him to seek opportunities to make them reality. His choice of victims was not random, but reflected deep-seated psychological issues related to power, control, and sexual violence. Women represented the primary targets for his rage, though his willingness to attack anyone who presented an opportunity demonstrated the breadth of his violent impulses. The psychological evaluation conducted after his arrest revealed personality disorders consistent with psychopathy, including lack of remorse, superficial charm, and an inflated sense of self-worth. These traits had allowed him to manipulate others and avoid detection while committing increasingly serious crimes. If you're following this disturbing psychological analysis, make sure to subscribe. Understanding how serial killers develop can help us recognize warning signs and prevent future tragedies. The environmental factors that contributed to Tiago's development included exposure to violence in his community, lack of positive role models, and a culture that often normalized aggressive behavior toward women. These societal influences combined with his individual psychological vulnerabilities to create the perfect storm for serial violence. Chapter 3. The Killing Begins. The first confirmed murder attributed to Tiago Henrique Gomes da Rocha occurred in 1999, marking the beginning of a killing spree that would terrorize Goiânia for over a decade. The victim was a young woman who had been working late at a small business when Tiago broke in, ostensibly to commit robbery, but ultimately escalating to sexual assault and murder. The crime scene revealed the methodical nature of Tiago's approach and his willingness to use extreme violence to achieve his goals. The victim had been tortured before being killed, suggesting that Tiago derived pleasure from the suffering he inflicted rather than simply seeking to eliminate witnesses to his crimes. The investigation into this first murder was hampered by the lack of obvious connections between the victim and any potential suspects. Tiago had chosen his target carefully, selecting someone he had observed but had no personal relationship, with making it difficult for police to identify him through traditional investigative methods. The brutality of the crime shocked the local community and law enforcement, who were unprepared for the level of violence displayed. The sexual nature of the assault, combined with the extreme physical violence, suggested that they were dealing with a particularly dangerous individual who was likely to strike again. Tiago's confidence grew with each successful attack, and he began to refine his methods and expand his hunting grounds throughout Goiânia. He studied police procedures and media coverage of his crimes, learning from any mistakes and adapting his approach to avoid detection. The second confirmed murder occurred just months later, following a similar pattern, but with variations that demonstrated Tiago's evolving methodology. He had learned from his first crime and implemented changes designed to reduce the risk of leaving evidence or being identified by witnesses. The victim selection process became more sophisticated as Tiago developed his skills as a predator. He would spend weeks or even months observing potential targets, learning their routines and identifying vulnerabilities that he could exploit. This patient approach allowed him to strike when victims were most vulnerable and least likely to be able to defend themselves. The escalation in violence was gradual but unmistakable, with each subsequent crime showing increased brutality and sexual sadism. Tiago's fantasies were becoming more elaborate and extreme, driving him to seek new ways to inflict suffering on his victims. The geographic spread of the crimes throughout Goiânia made it difficult for police to establish patterns or predict where the next attack might occur. Tiago deliberately varied his locations and methods to confuse investigators and avoid establishing a clear modus operandi that could be used to track him. The psychological impact on the community was severe, with women in particular altering their behavior and routines in response to the growing threat. The randomness of the attacks made everyone feel vulnerable, creating an atmosphere of fear that permeated daily life in the city. Local media coverage of the crimes was extensive, but often sensationalized, contributing to public panic while potentially providing Tiago with the attention and notoriety he craved. The killer was becoming a household name in Goiânia, though his true identity remained unknown. The police response was initially fragmented, with different precincts handling individual cases without recognizing the connections between them. This lack of coordination allowed Tiago to continue his killing spree, while investigators struggled to piece together the pattern of his crimes. Chapter 4. The Reign of Terror intensifies. As the new millennium dawned, Tiago Henrique Gomes de Rocha's killing spree entered its most deadly phase, with the frequency and brutality of his attacks reaching unprecedented levels. The year 2000 marked a turning point in his criminal career, as he became more confident in his abilities and more willing to take risks in pursuit of his violent fantasies. The attacks during this period showed a marked escalation in both frequency and savagery. Tiago was no longer content with occasional murders, but began killing multiple victims within short time periods, sometimes committing several attacks in a single week. This acceleration suggested that his psychological needs were intensifying and that the satisfaction he derived from each crime was becoming shorter-lived. His victim selection expanded beyond his initial focus on young women to include a broader range of targets. Elderly individuals living alone became frequent victims, as Tiago recognized their vulnerability and the reduced likelihood of resistance. Children and teenagers were also targeted, demonstrating the complete absence of moral boundaries in his criminal behavior. The methods of attack became increasingly sophisticated and brutal, Tiago began using a variety of weapons and torture techniques, suggesting that he was experimenting with different ways to inflict maximum suffering on his victims. The sexual component of his crimes also became more extreme, with evidence of prolonged assault and degradation. One of the most disturbing aspects of this period was Tiago's apparent enjoyment of the fear he was creating in the community. He began leaving messages at crime scenes and making anonymous phone calls to police and media outlets, taunting authorities and reveling in the attention his crimes were receiving. The geographic scope of his activities expanded beyond Goiânia to include surrounding municipalities, making coordination between different police jurisdictions even more challenging. Tiago's knowledge of the region and his access to transportation allowed him to strike in multiple locations while maintaining his base of operations in the capital. The investigation efforts were hampered by the lack of advanced forensic technology and the limited resources available to local law enforcement. DNA analysis was not yet widely available in Brazil, and investigators had to rely on traditional detective work and witness testimony to build their cases. The psychological profile developed by investigators during this period identified the killer as an organized, intelligent individual with extensive knowledge of police procedures and forensic science. This profile was remarkably accurate, but provided limited assistance in identifying specific suspects from the general population. The media coverage reached fever pitch during this period, with daily reports about the latest attacks and speculation about the killer's identity and motivations. The intense publicity created additional pressure on law enforcement while potentially encouraging copycat crimes and false confessions. The impact on Goiânia's economy and social life was significant, with businesses reporting decreased foot traffic and social events being cancelled due to safety concerns. The city's reputation as a safe, modern metropolis was being destroyed by the actions of a single individual. Share this investigation with others who need to understand how serial killers operate. Awareness of their methods can help protect potential victims and aid in their capture. The psychological toll on the community was immense, with mental health professionals reporting increased rates of anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress among residents. The randomness of the attacks made everyone feel vulnerable, creating a climate of fear that affected all aspects of daily life. Chapter 5. The investigation intensifies. By 2003, the mounting body count and public pressure forced law enforcement agencies to dramatically escalate their response to what had become known as the Maniac of Goiânia case. A special task force was created, combining resources from the civil police, military police, and federal investigators to coordinate the hunt for Brazil's most wanted serial killer. Detective Carlos Alberto Camargo was appointed to lead the investigation, bringing with him over 20 years of experience in homicide cases and a reputation for methodical, thorough police work. Camargo immediately recognized that they were dealing with an exceptionally intelligent and organized killer who had been successfully evading capture through careful planning and intimate knowledge of police procedures. The task force began by conducting a comprehensive review of all crimes potentially linked to the serial killer, creating a detailed database of victims, crime scenes, and evidence. This systematic approach revealed patterns that had previously been overlooked and helped investigators understand the killer's evolving methodology and psychological profile. One of the breakthrough discoveries was the recognition that many of the crime scenes showed evidence of the perpetrator having inside knowledge of security systems and police response times. This led investigators to focus on individuals with backgrounds in security, law enforcement, or related fields who would have access to such information. The investigation also benefited from advances in forensic science that were becoming available in Brazil during this period. DNA analysis, fingerprint databases, and improved crime scene processing techniques provided new tools for linking crimes and potentially identifying the perpetrator. Psychological profiling became a crucial component of the investigation, with experts from the University of São Paulo and international consultants providing insights into the killer's likely background, motivations, and behavioral patterns. The profile that emerged described an organized, intelligent individual with possible military or security training who derived sexual satisfaction from violence and control. The geographic analysis of the crimes revealed important patterns about the killer's likely residence and travel routes. Computer mapping technology helped investigators identify clusters of activity and predict potential future target areas, allowing for more strategic deployment of surveillance and patrol resources. Witness interviews were conducted and reconducted, using improved techniques designed to extract more detailed and accurate information. Several witnesses provided descriptions of a suspicious individual seen near crime scenes, leading to the creation of composite sketches that were widely distributed to the public. The investigation also focused on the killer's apparent knowledge of media coverage and police procedures. Analysis of the timing and locations of attacks suggested that the perpetrator was closely following news reports and adjusting his behavior based on information released to the public. Surveillance operations were expanded throughout Goiânia, with undercover officers deployed in areas identified as potential hunting grounds. These operations required enormous resources and coordination, but were essential for protecting potential victims and gathering intelligence about suspicious activities. The task force also worked to improve communication and coordination between different law enforcement agencies, addressing the jurisdictional issues that had previously hampered the investigation. Regular briefings and shared databases ensured that all relevant information was available to investigators, regardless of which agency had collected it. Public cooperation became increasingly important as the investigation progressed, with citizens providing tips and information that helped investigators piece together the killer's activities. A dedicated hotline was established to handle the flood of calls from concerned residents reporting suspicious behavior or potential sightings. Chapter 6. The net closes in. The breakthrough in the Maniac of Goiânia case came in 2004, when a combination of improved forensic analysis, witness testimony, and investigative persistence finally provided law enforcement with the evidence needed to identify Tiago Henrique Gomes de Rocha as their primary suspect. The moment of revelation came when DNA evidence from multiple crime scenes was matched to a sample obtained during a routine investigation of a minor crime. The DNA match was the result of Brazil's expanding forensic capabilities and the systematic collection of evidence from all crime scenes potentially linked to the serial killer. When Tiago was arrested for a minor assault charge unrelated to the serial killings, his DNA was collected as part of standard procedures and entered into the growing database of genetic evidence. The match was confirmed through multiple independent tests, providing investigators with irrefutable proof that the same individual had committed crimes spanning several years and dozens of victims. The genetic evidence linked Tiago to murders, rapes, and assaults throughout Goiânia and surrounding areas, finally connecting the dots that had eluded investigators for years. Detective Camargo and his team moved quickly to build a comprehensive case against Tiago, knowing that they would have only one chance to ensure that all his crimes were properly documented and prosecuted. The investigation expanded to include a thorough examination of Tiago's background, employment history, and personal relationships. The surveillance of Tiago began immediately after he was identified as a suspect. with investigators working to gather additional evidence while ensuring that he did not have the opportunity to commit further crimes. The surveillance revealed patterns of behavior consistent with the psychological profile that had been developed, including his methodical observation of potential victims and his knowledge of security procedures. The arrest operation was carefully planned to minimize the risk of Tiago destroying evidence or harming additional victims. On October 2, 2005, a coordinated team of investigators executed arrest warrants at multiple locations, taking Tiago into custody while simultaneously searching his residence and workplace for evidence. The search of Tiago's home revealed a treasure trove of evidence linking him to the serial killings, including weapons, personal items taken from victims, and detailed notes about his crimes and future plans. The discovery of this evidence confirmed investigators' worst fears about the scope and planning involved in his criminal activities. Perhaps most disturbing was the discovery of detailed journals and maps that Tiago had maintained throughout his killing spree, documenting his crimes and planning future attacks. These materials provided investigators with unprecedented insight into the mind of a serial killer and helped them understand the full extent of his criminal activities. The interrogation of Tiago began immediately after his arrest, with experienced investigators using psychological techniques designed to encourage confession and cooperation. Initial interviews revealed an individual who showed no remorse for his crimes and seemed to take pride in his ability to evade capture for so long. The news of Tiago's arrest spread quickly throughout Goiânia, bringing a mixture of relief and shock to a community that had lived in fear for years. The revelation that the killer had been working as a security guard, someone trusted to protect people and property, added an extra layer of betrayal and horror to an already traumatic situation. Like and subscribe if you want to follow more investigations that reveal how law enforcement uses modern techniques to catch the most dangerous criminals. Understanding these methods helps us appreciate the complexity of criminal investigations. The arrest marked the end of one of the longest and most intensive criminal investigations in Brazilian history. But it was only the beginning of the legal proceedings that would determine Tiago's fate and provide justice for his many victims. Chapter 7. The Confessions and Revelations. The interrogation of Tiago Henrique Gomes da Rocha following his arrest revealed the mind of a serial killer whose crimes were far more extensive and disturbing than investigators had initially realized. Over the course of several weeks, Tiago provided detailed confessions to dozens of murders, rapes, and assaults, painting a picture of systematic violence that had terrorized Goiânia for nearly a decade. The confession process was methodical and chilling, with Tiago displaying an almost clinical detachment as he described his crimes in graphic detail. He showed no emotion or remorse as he recounted the suffering he had inflicted on his victims, instead seeming to take pride in his ability to plan and execute such elaborate crimes without being caught. Tiago's confessions revealed that his criminal activities had begun much earlier than investigators had suspected, with his first violent crimes dating back to his teenage years. The escalation from petty theft and voyeurism to rape and murder had been gradual but steady, demonstrating a clear progression in his criminal behavior. The geographic scope of his crimes was also larger than initially believed, with Tiago admitting to attacks in multiple states throughout central Brazil. His work as a security guard had provided him with opportunities to travel and had given him detailed knowledge of security systems and police procedures in various locations. Perhaps most disturbing was Tiago's revelation that he had maintained detailed records of his crimes, including photographs, personal items taken from victims, and written accounts of his attacks. These materials, discovered during searches of his residence and other locations, provided investigators with unprecedented documentation of a serial killer's activities. The psychological evaluation of Tiago conducted during this period revealed a complex individual who combined high intelligence with complete lack of empathy. He demonstrated sophisticated planning abilities and showed extensive knowledge of forensic science and police procedures, which he had used to avoid detection for years. Tiago's confessions also revealed the sexual motivation behind many of his crimes, with detailed descriptions of the sadistic pleasure he derived from controlling and torturing his victims. The level of violence he described was extreme, even by the standards of serial killers, suggesting deep-seated psychological pathology. The investigation team worked tirelessly to verify Tiago's confessions, cross-referencing his statements with physical evidence and witness testimony. In many cases, his detailed knowledge of crime, scenes and victim characteristics provided confirmation that he was indeed responsible for the attacks he claimed to have committed. The confession process also revealed Tiago's awareness of the media coverage his crimes had received and his satisfaction with the fear he had created in the community. He had followed news reports closely and had adjusted his methods based on information released to the public about the investigation. Family members and acquaintances of Tiago expressed shock and disbelief at the revelations about his criminal activities. Many described him as quiet and unremarkable, someone who had never shown obvious signs of the violence he was capable of committing. The victims' families were provided with opportunities to learn about the circumstances of their loved ones' deaths, though many found the details too disturbing to process. The confirmation that their family members had been victims of such a prolific serial killer brought both closure and additional trauma. The confessions also revealed Tiago's plans for future crimes, including detailed preparations for attacks that were prevented only by his arrest. The discovery of these plans highlighted how many additional lives had been saved by the successful investigation and arrest. Mental health professionals who evaluated Tiago during this period diagnosed him with multiple personality disorders, including psychopathy and antisocial personality disorder. These diagnoses helped explain his ability to function in society while committing such heinous crimes. Chapter 8. The Trial of the Century. The Trial of Tiago. Henrique Gomes de Rocha began on March 15, 2007, in a Goiânia courthouse that had been transformed into a fortress due to intense public interest and security concerns. The proceedings would become one of the most closely watched criminal trials in Brazilian history, as the nation sought to understand how such a prolific serial killer had operated. Undetected for so long, Judge Antonio Carlos de Oliveira presided over the trial with the challenging task of managing proceedings involving dozens of murder charges and hundreds of pieces of evidence. The courtroom was packed with journalists, legal observers, victims' family members, and members of the public who had followed the case since the first attacks began. The prosecution, led by prosecutor Maria Helena Bezerra, faced the monumental task of presenting evidence for crimes spanning nearly a decade and involving dozens of victims. Their strategy focused on demonstrating the systematic nature of Tiago's crimes and his complete lack of remorse or potential for rehabilitation. The evidence presented was overwhelming and disturbing, including crime scene photographs, forensic analysis, and Tiago's own detailed confessions. The prosecution methodically linked each crime to the defendant through DNA evidence, witness testimony, and physical evidence found in his possession. The testimony of surviving victims was particularly powerful, with several women who had survived Tiago's attacks providing harrowing accounts of their experiences. Their courage in facing their attacker in court provided compelling evidence of the trauma and suffering he had caused. Expert witnesses included forensic scientists, psychologists, and criminologists who helped the court understand the scope and nature of Tiago's crimes. Their testimony provided context for the systematic violence and helped explain how such crimes could be prevented in the future. The defense team, led by attorney Carlos Roberto Silva, faced an almost impossible task given the overwhelming evidence against their client. Their strategy focused on mental health issues and childhood trauma, arguing for life imprisonment rather than the death penalty that prosecutors were seeking. Tiago's behavior during the trial was notable for his apparent lack of emotion or remorse. He showed little interest in the proceedings and seemed detached from the testimony about his crimes, reinforcing the prosecution's argument that he was a dangerous psychopath incapable of rehabilitation. The victim impact statements provided some of the most emotional moments of the trial, with family members describing the devastating impact of losing loved ones to such senseless violence. Their testimony highlighted the human cost of Tiago's crimes and the lasting trauma experienced by survivors and families. The trial also featured extensive discussion of the investigation process and the challenges faced by law enforcement in tracking such an organized and intelligent killer. The testimony provided valuable insights into criminal investigation techniques and the importance of interagency cooperation. Media coverage of the trial was extensive but carefully managed to protect the dignity of victims and their families. The proceedings were broadcast live on television, allowing the public to witness the pursuit of justice while maintaining appropriate sensitivity to the traumatic nature of the evidence. The psychological evaluation of Tiago, presented during the trial, revealed the depth of his mental illness and the factors that had contributed to his criminal behavior. Expert testimony helped the court understand the difference between mental illness and criminal responsibility. The trial lasted several months, with the prosecution presenting evidence for dozens of murders and hundreds of other crimes. The sheer scope of Tiago's criminal activities made the proceedings complex and emotionally draining for all involved. Share this story to help others understand how the justice system handles complex serial killer cases. Awareness of these processes is important for public safety and crime prevention. Chapter 9. Justice and the Psychology of Evil. Dawn. September 12, 2007. After months of testimony and deliberation, the jury delivered their verdict in one of Brazil's most significant criminal trials. Tiago Henrique Gomes de Rocha was found guilty on all counts, including 39 murders, 37 rapes, and dozens of other violent crimes. He was sentenced to over 600 years in prison, ensuring that he would never again have the opportunity to harm innocent people. The verdict was met with relief and satisfaction by the victims' families and the broader community, who saw it as validation of their suffering and a clear message that such crimes would not be tolerated. However, the sentences could never truly compensate for the lives lost or heal the trauma inflicted on survivors and families. The psychological analysis of Tiago, conducted during and after the trial, provided unprecedented insight into the mind of a serial killer. Mental health professionals diagnosed him with multiple personality disorders, including psychopathy, antisocial personality disorder, and sexual sadism disorder, creating a psychological profile that explained his ability to commit such heinous crimes. The study of Tiago's case became important for understanding serial killer behavior and developing prevention strategies. Researchers from universities throughout Brazil and internationally examined his crimes, psychological profile, and the investigation process to improve law enforcement techniques and mental health interventions. The impact on Goiânia's community was profound and lasting, with many residents requiring counseling and support to deal with the trauma of living through such a prolonged period of terror. Mental health services were expanded to address the widespread psychological impact of the crimes. The case also led to significant improvements in law enforcement procedures and interagency cooperation throughout Brazil. The investigation techniques developed during the hunt for Tiago became models for future serial killer investigations and helped establish protocols for handling complex criminal cases. The victims' families established support groups and advocacy organizations to help other families affected by violent crime. Their work has provided crucial support services and has helped improve victim rights and services throughout Brazil. Tiago's imprisonment in a maximum security facility has been marked by continued psychological evaluation and study. He has shown no remorse for his crimes and continues to display the antisocial behavior that characterized his criminal activities. The case has been studied extensively by criminologists and psychologists, seeking to understand the factors that create serial killers and the warning signs that might help prevent future crimes. The detailed documentation of Tiago's crimes and psychological development has provided valuable data for this research. The media coverage of the case has continued long after the trial ended, with documentaries, books, and academic papers examining different aspects of the crimes and investigation. The case has become a reference point for discussions about criminal justice, mental health, and public safety in Brazil. The security industry in Brazil implemented new screening procedures and training programs in response to the revelation that Tiago had used his position as a security guard to facilitate his crimes. These changes have helped prevent similar situations and improved the overall security of the profession. The case also highlighted the importance of DNA databases and forensic technology in solving complex crimes. The investment in these technologies that followed Tiago's arrest has helped solve numerous other cases and has improved the overall effectiveness of criminal investigations in Brazil. Chapter 10. Legacy of Terror and Lessons Learned. More than 15 years after Tiago Henrique Gomes da Rocha's arrest, his case continues to serve as a stark reminder of the capacity for evil that can exist within seemingly ordinary individuals, and the devastating impact that a single predator can have on an entire community. The Maniac of Goiânia case has become a watershed moment in Brazilian criminal justice, influencing everything from law enforcement procedures to mental health policies. The long-term impact on Goiânia has been complex and multifaceted. While the city has recovered from the immediate terror of the killing spree, the psychological scars remain visible in the increased security measures, changed behavioral patterns, and ongoing vigilance that characterizes daily life for many residents. The case fundamentally altered how Brazilians think about personal safety and the potential for violence in their communities. The investigation techniques developed during the hunt for Tiago have been adopted by law enforcement agencies throughout Brazil and Latin America. The systematic approach to evidence collection, the use of psychological profiling, and the coordination between multiple agencies have become standard practices for investigating serial crimes and other complex criminal cases. The case has also contributed significantly to the academic understanding of serial killer behavior, with researchers continuing to study Tiago's psychological profile and criminal development. His case is frequently cited in criminology and psychology textbooks as an example of how environmental factors, mental illness, and opportunity can combine to create extremely dangerous individuals. Victim advocacy groups, established in response to the case, have become powerful forces for criminal justice reform in Brazil. These organizations have successfully lobbied for improved victim rights, better support services for crime survivors, and enhanced protections for vulnerable populations. The technological advances in forensic science that were crucial to solving the case have continued to evolve, with DNA databases, digital forensics, and other investigative tools becoming increasingly sophisticated. These improvements have helped solve numerous other cases and have made it more difficult for serial offenders to evade detection. Mental health professionals have used insights from Tiago's case to develop better screening tools and intervention strategies for identifying potentially dangerous individuals before they commit serious crimes. While predicting violent behavior remains challenging, The case has contributed to improved understanding of risk factors and warning signs. The case has also influenced popular culture, inspiring numerous books, documentaries, and fictional works that explore the psychology of serial killers and the impact of their crimes on communities. These cultural products have helped maintain public awareness of the issues while providing educational value about crime prevention and personal safety. Educational institutions throughout Brazil have incorporated lessons from the case into their curricula, using it to teach students about criminal justice, psychology, and public safety. The case serves as a powerful example of how multiple systems must work together to protect society from dangerous individuals. The ongoing imprisonment of Tiago continues to generate discussion about criminal justice policy, including debates about rehabilitation versus punishment, the effectiveness of life sentences, and the appropriate treatment of mentally ill offenders. His case remains relevant to contemporary discussions about criminal justice reform. The families of Tiago's victims have shown remarkable resilience and strength in the years since the trial, many becoming advocates for other crime victims and working to prevent similar tragedies. Their courage and determination have helped transform their personal tragedies into forces for positive change. The case has also highlighted the importance of community vigilance and cooperation in preventing and solving crimes. The eventual capture of Tiago was made possible by the combined efforts of law enforcement, forensic scientists, and concerned citizens who provided crucial information and support. As Brazil continues to grapple with high rates of violent crime, the lessons learned from the Maniac of Goiânia case remain relevant and important. The case demonstrates both the devastating potential of unchecked criminal behavior and the power of determined investigation and prosecution to bring dangerous individuals to justice. The memory of Tiago's victims serves as a constant reminder of the human cost of violence and the importance of protecting society's most vulnerable members. Their stories continue to inspire efforts to prevent similar crimes and to support those who have been affected by violence. The legacy of the Maniac of Goiânia case will continue to influence Brazilian society for generations to come, serving as both a cautionary tale about the potential for evil and a testament to the power of justice and human resilience in the face of unimaginable horror. If this story intrigued you, subscribe to the channel to discover other real crimes that shocked the world and the minds behind them.